Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cipher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. I am Q Ward. You are tuned in to Civic Cipher.
Yes, you are. And we got some stuff to talk about today, so please stick around. Today we are going to stand in solidarity with our Muslim sisters in particular, because as it turns out, Muslim women are having their hijabs torn off by police all over America. And this is something that we wanted to talk about, and we really wanted to have a Muslim woman on the show, but it just hasn't timed out, and we wanted to make sure that we got to the conversation while it was still more or less in the news, so that you could, find the articles and do whatever research you wanted to do to supplement that. Also, we're going to spend some time talking about Donald Trump, Joe Biden, their debate, and the Supreme Court. So some housekeeping, some maintenance, some catching up that we've had to do, because we haven't really been able to spend any time the past few episodes discussing the goings on that are central to politics in this country and exactly what is at stake. And so we are going to, again, spend some time discussing, really we have to talk about the Supreme Court, because we are kind of in some unprecedented, scary times. But also we need to, speak to the concerns surrounding the two candidates and help each other, because we're still processing it as well, but help each other reconcile what a path forward looks like. There will be a path forward. We do have to make a decision as a country, and we need to make sure that it's the right one. So that and so much more to stick around for here on Civic Cipher. But before we get there, like we always do at this time, let's start off with some Ebony Excellence.
Shall we?
I think you shall.
This week's Ebony Excellence, ironically sponsored by Actively Black. There is greatness in our DNA. Visit activelyblack.com. So I wanted to highlight Actively Black and their founder, Lanny Smith, and congratulate them for providing the apparel and uniforms for the Nigerian Olympic team. As the Olympics are in a few weeks now, that's a really, really big deal. So Actively Black is a Black-owned entity created by former professional basketball player, and that's NBA player Lanny Smith. We saw a void in representation, ownership, and investment back into our communities from existing brands that have profited billions by utilizing Black talent, Black culture, and Black consumerism. This is a brand designed by us for us. The mission: to uplift and reinvest back into the Black community and to improve the mental health and physical fitness of our people. We are not building an apparel brand. The clothes are just the uniform for the movement. I love that.
Yeah.
Everybody is welcome to purchase, wear, and support Actively Black regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion.
I like that too. As
long as you know and support the purpose and the mission to uplift the Black community, you are welcome into our tribe. And a quote from founder Lanny Smith: "We're not asking for a seat at the table anymore. We are building our own table." I've had the opportunity to meet and spend time with Brother Lanny, and he's an incredible brother. The brand is incredible. Please check out activelyblack.com and look for Actively Black on the Nigerian national team at this year's Olympics.
Real quick, I want to add something before we move on, that a lot of times non-Black people will look at Black stuff like it's not for them.
Yes.
And that's rarely is that true. And I think Actively Black is putting that on full display. So I love that. Okay. So again, we wanted to cover this story a little bit sooner, because we had heard about these instances of Muslim women at the protests on the college campuses in support of Palestine, being attacked on the campuses, and specifically having their hijabs removed. And that is something that was always very sensitive. It's a sensitive topic, to Q and to me. We know people who are Muslim, and then women in particular, we know how much discrimination and fear comes with wearing that out in public, because there are people who are looking for the easily identifiable others in this country, as Q would say. And, you know, there's kind of like a wheel that keeps turning. For a while, it'll be black people. For a while, it'll be, you know, Mexican people. For a while, it'll be Asian people. For a while, it'll be folks from the Middle East, Muslim people, etc. But, you know, we all noticed something around here in 2001, because we were alive back then. But we noticed that, you know, there was a shift in the country, in the way that the country approached Muslim people, and the way the news covered Muslim people, and the way that the jokes went back and forth on stage about Muslim people. And somehow the faith known as Islam became associated with terrorism and suicide bombings and all of these things that is not what the faith is about. Just a little bit of background on me. I grew up Christian. My father was a Christian minister, but my father had his doctorate in theology, meaning that he had to study all of the religions, not just Christianity. And one of the things that I've said many times throughout my life is that where education exists, prejudice cannot. And often enough, that's the truth. Education and prejudice are like natural enemies to each other. My father was not a prejudiced man when it came to other faiths. Certainly not Abrahamic religions like Islam, like Judaism, because they are all born from the same sort of root system. And as a result of that, we were not raised, me, my brothers, my sisters, we were not raised to regard Christianity as something that is greater than or lesser than any other faith, right? And so once 9/11 took place and people who subscribed to Islam for their faith became under attack and under this intense scrutiny, my heart was broken for them, right? And I did my best to, you know, stand in solidarity, but, you know, I was a kid at the time, and, you know, you just do what you can on your college campus or whatever, you know, and certainly weren't at the level that we're at now, right? But I remember talking to people who lived through that time. And, you know, again, we have friends who lived through that time, and they've told us how scary that was and how they had to hide a piece of themselves and had to, you know, for safety and for fear, right? And I discovered how important hijabs are. It's not unlike, you know, for Jewish folks who wear yarmulkes or kippas, right? And there are Jewish women who cover their hair as well. There are Catholic women, you know, nuns cover their hair. You know what I mean? This is not something that's exclusive to one faith. But for some reason in this country, after 9/11 in particular, that hijab started to be associated with terrorism and anti-Americanism and so forth and so on. And so the folks that felt like this is America would see that as a symbol of anti-American hate, right? And so it became a target. And we've heard over the years people wearing hijabs being attacked, their hijabs being snatched off at schools and, you know, places like this. And I will say this out loud, and I know you feel the same way. If I was ever to witness someone's hijab being torn off, like in my peripheral, that is the sort of thing that would make me, like, I might lose my life on a day like that, because it's just, I realize the amount of, I realize what goes into that. You know what I mean? That's not a commitment to a culture as much as it is a commitment to God. And I believe that the bond between a human being and their faith is sacred. I've been all over the world, seen faith expressed through every type of human being that they make. I've hiked mountains to see people pray to statues of Buddha. I've been in Muslim countries. I've been to the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi. I've been to synagogues. I've been to temples. I've been allowed to pray with Sikh people. you name it. Again, my dad did right by us. He made sure that we weren't afraid or prejudiced, right? But I believe an attack on someone's faith, it's attack on their hope, it's attack on their dreams, and so forth, right? So this story stood out to me. And again, we really wanted to do it right, but enough time has passed and enough of these stories have come about that today is the right time. Now, I've said a lot painting the picture. I feel like you got to jump in here.
So you said that education and prejudice don't often share the same space. And I want to push back a little bit.
Okay.
And say that intelligence and enlightenment
there we go.
and prejudice don't often share the same spaces. We see very highly educated people go to the Supreme Court to shut down affirmative action, to shut down diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to shut down things like the Fearless Fund. And those people are highly educated, law degrees, and things of that sort.
You're not wrong.
So
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
With enlightenment, empathy, and intelligence, prejudice typically ceases to exist. Education doesn't seem to mean much with regards to that, because these leaders have attended Harvard Law and gotten scholarly mentions and degrees and put on all kind of robes and capes and all of these things, and they still are blatantly prejudiced and racist and bigoted and homophobic and xenophobic, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah, no, I definitely go with that.
Empathy. The thing that is done so effectively by those who very intentionally other people is the removal of empathy, because I'm not the one being attacked, so that really don't have nothing to do with me. And they've done such a masterful job of splintering us into into pieces rather, not into people, so that we do not approach things as members of the human race. We approach things as black people,
as tribes.
We approach things as members of the LGBTQ plus community. We approach things as women. We approach things as Christian. We approach things as Muslim, separately broken into these tribes. Because if we ever looked next to one another and realized that we were all fighting for the same thing, we would fight together and we would storm the streets of this country probably daily. But we'll storm it, you and I and our small group, and all the other groups will look and, support from a distance, or, not obstruct us, but definitely not join in, because that's not their fight.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing happen in this country, even today, right now, as we record this, is everyone watching everyone go through their own plight and just kind of watching it happen. And, thoughts and prayers and wish you the best, but this should be it should be one of the most offensive stories and headlines in the news. But there's a mixture of so many awful things happening and so many people kind of not caring because it doesn't apply to them. People that would be grossly offended if someone removed their yarmulke from their head are not moved at all by this story. They should be enraged.
Yeah.
They should be enraged because they know how they'd feel were the shoe on the other foot. It's not like they're not enlightened enough to know, or not educated enough to know, or not mature enough to know. They know exactly how they'd feel if placed in that same position. So when we don't storm the streets for one another, when we don't stand up for one another, when we do not platform one another, it's very, very discouraging, because we should be just as angry. I should be just as angry by a Muslim woman having to deal with this as I was when my son was kicked and called the N-word at school. I should be just as angry.
Yeah.
And if you find a way to make me just not care enough, right? Q, you got your own problems to worry about. Can't worry about those people's problems too. You effectively isolated those people and removed the power of empathy and shared solidarity with our fellow human beings. There are so many ways that they masterfully divide us and force us to not be there for one another. I told a young lady yesterday who started a business recently, and through conversation, she ended up asking me, what can we do for each other? And she didn't mean me and her. She meant people. And I said, continue to show up for one another. That's the most. Mm-hmm. It's not the money. It's actually caring and showing up. You know, Rams and I are working on something really important with regards to allyship right now. And I hear people that don't like the word allyship or the idea of it. And it's like, there's something that you're missing. We cannot do this alone. Whatever this is for whoever's listening, whatever that mission is that you have, whatever that plight is that you're trying to get over or get through, you cannot do it by yourself. We cannot do it by ourselves. So stories like this should infuriate us. You should not have to be a Muslim woman for this to, I almost used a bad word.
Yeah, I like this.
For this to make you upset.
Yeah. You
should just have to think about how you would feel if your self-determination was being torn off of you.
Yes.
If your sense of self, if your sense of pride, if your sense of love, if your sense of joy, if your deity was being snatched away from you, how would you feel? And if you are a person that's atheist, you care about something, you care about someone. If you don't, I'm not talking to you, just to make that simple, to make that plain. If you don't care about anything or anyone, the message is not for you. But for most of us that do care about something or someone, imagine that thing or that person being snatched away from you. And imagine how that would make you feel. And that's how you should feel every time you read a headline, every time you hear or see a story where someone's dignity and self-determination and self-worth and love and heart is being torn away from them and they're being denied their most basic rights. You should be infuriated, even if it does not knock on your door.
I'm going to follow that up with the actual article that we chose to base today's conversation on. But I don't know how much it's going to add because I think he said everything that we needed to hear. Q, well said. This comes from The Nation. The title is Muslim Women Are Having Their Hijabs Torn Off by Police All Over America. The influx of arrests of Muslim women at pro-Palestine protests highlights a critical flaw in the criminal justice system. The hijab is an expression of a Muslim woman's faith, symbolizing modesty, privacy, and agency over one's body, and depriving a woman of that coverage can be humiliating and traumatizing. That's one of the things I want everybody listening to know. Okay? Muslim women have a clear First Amendment right to keep their heads covered for religious purposes, including in spaces where others might have to remove head coverings. Reflecting this, the Bureau of Prisons allows for incarcerated Muslims to keep their hijabs on in federal prisons. And at least 17 states, including New York, specifically allow for religious head coverings to be worn throughout a prison. Yet there are no federal laws that explicitly protect a woman's right to keep on her hijab while being arrested, in police custody, or in a temporary holding facility, either for a mugshot or otherwise. Okay. The difficulty that Muslim women have experienced is also reflective in the general vitriol that Muslim women have been facing in activism spaces even before pro-Palestine solidarity encampments spread across American universities. Many Muslim activists had already been experiencing violations of their religious liberties. Okay, I'm going to share this story because it's really important and I think it helps paint the picture and gives you some human insight into what this is like. And for those that are not Muslim, for those that don't have these cultural elements that are so dear to you, suffice it to say that the belief in this is worth dying for, and people have died for it. So it's perhaps among the most significant of beliefs that a human being can have. It's that important. I don't care how much hatred you have. A human being deserves dignity. I guess hatred and dignity is another, but how much you don't like somebody. A human being deserves dignity, right? So I'll share. Janan, a 27-year-old engineer from Maryland who requested to keep her last name anonymous, was arrested in March while protesting in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. While in custody, Janan said she was ordered to take off her hijab for a mugshot. Confused and uncomfortable, she asked countless questions like, who would be seeing the photos? I don't even need to go on. Who asked that question? Think about it. Who would ask a question like that? Who's going to see these photos? Save for a person where it's that important to them that their hair is covered. Other questions. Do people normally resist here? In other words, I'm not resisting. You have me. I'm in your custody. I don't need to deny my God in this moment. But Janan eventually complied and took off her head covering, fearful that her resistance in the jail would impact the outcome of her charges. Quote, I felt awful. I felt violated, confused, stunned, naked. I felt the most important thing to me was taken away. I'm worried about other women. There needs to be a system in place if a hijabi woman or if a Muslim gets arrested. Where do they pray? And again, for those who are intimately familiar with this faith,
this next question is...
This is a mouthful. Yeah, I'm
insanely important.
Yes. And that's why I put it there. So you put these women at an intersection of, do you comply with God or do you comply with the police? And if you don't know anything about the Muslim faith, you do know something about faith in general. And there are people, countless people, millions, maybe billions of people who have chosen God throughout the existence of human beings over whatever else. Faith is that strong. Belief in a better tomorrow for yourself and your posterity is that strong. A higher power, a purpose is that strong. It's that powerful of a motivator. Once upon a time, we had a Muslim man coming here, just to tag on to that where do they pray thing. He came and prayed in our studio. He did an episode with us. His name is Resistance is Beautiful. Please look him up on social media. He's a real one. Love that guy. He had to take a moment to pray. For those that don't know, Muslim people will pray 5 times a day. And this studio never felt more blessed than that moment. And we're not overly, religious folks here. That's not what we are. But there's something very special and very sacred about a person following their faith. And here on this show, we wanted to bring your attention to the fact that this is a thing that's happening to our Muslim sisters, that they deserve your protection. They deserve your voice. They deserve your support. And when and if legislation makes its way to protect hijabi women in the same way that the Crown Act was passed and so forth and so on, we need to show up for them because they deserve that. And anyone who chooses to exercise their religious freedoms, however, however is consistent with their faith. So food for thought, bear it in mind.